Welcome, Steve Hatfield, Global Future of Work Leader for Deloitte.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Hatfield, and I'm very excited to be here. I lead our efforts globally at Deloitte on the topic of future of work. And as you know, the dynamics around work, workforce, and workplace have been top of mind for business leaders and organizations, clearly since for the last 3 years. As you can see from the following slide, this is a set of surveys that we did pulsing CEOs of organizations across the last 2-year period. And labor and skills shortages continues to be sort of top of mind for them. In fact, it was the number one issue over the past 3 surveys. And in the last survey, it slipped just a little to number 2 underneath market instability and inflation. So this dynamic around skills and labor shortage and inflation and economic headwinds continues to be front and center for business leaders. But what do these really demonstrate around the global dynamics that we're experiencing? We have about 3.3 billion workers globally, all with different expectations and needs. In 2022, it's predicted that 31% of the global workforce worked remotely or in a hybrid fashion. And 26% of global workers said they would quit if they were told to return to the work more than a certain number of hours per week. And certain countries are leading the way. The US, the UK, Germany, and France, all with substantial portions of their workforce working in a hybrid fashion. So what does that mean across the different dimensions of who's winning and who's losing in this new hybrid world? You can see here from Bloomberg, those sectors in the US economy that sort of gained over the last year versus those that retreated. And again, this has been shifting a little bit as of late in the last few months, but it shows you broadly where the work has been shifting and where the workers have been shifting from. So as we think about this, what's the real myth and reality here? What's really happening? The Great Resignation gets way too much press. My view is that it's actually becoming a bit more about forcing organizations to think broadly about different pools of talent and appreciating the worker sentiment that has shifted as a result of the pandemic. Job resignations may be up 23% over pre-pandemic levels. And as noted, a strong portion of the workforce is considering leaving their employer base for new opportunities. We don't necessarily see this changing lately, even with the economic headwinds. The dynamic last year around layoffs, somewhere in the vicinity of 153,000 tech workers were laid off into an environment where the unemployment rate for tech workers was 1.7% versus the broader US economy at 3.7%. And still in an environment where there's a predicted level of 10 million open jobs. And so with that, we're starting to see organizations realize they need to think about different pools of talent. We're starting to see a rise, if you will, in hiring the neurodivergent, those on the autism spectrum that may not do well in terms of the social cues in an office, but in a hybrid world, actually have some really interesting skills that could be tapped into. Or those that are thinking about hiring people in terms of their skills versus their pedigree. So it's a little bit less about where they went to college and a little bit more about the experiences they have and the kind of skills that they can bring to the table. In addition, worker sentiment has definitely shifted. And interestingly enough, the dialogue as of late on quiet quitting was the precursor to that was Tanping in China and YOLO early on in the pandemic. The New York Times coined the phrase, "You only live once." And what's really happening is a fundamental shift in worker sentiment about work-life balance and where work sits in terms of the level of importance for them. We did a study of Gen Zs and millennials globally, over 11,000 respondents across 120 countries. And the top reasons for choosing an employer for that population continues to be work-life balance, learning and development, and pay. And the top reasons for leaving an employer, inadequate rewards, mental health, and burnout. And so there's definitely this dimension of what do I really want for my life and what am I interested in doing? And if you're not giving me an opportunity to grow, if you're not giving me an opportunity to be further motivated intrinsically, if you're not doing things that matter to me personally, I'm not going to give you that extra layer of effort. Though that may be seen in some respects as quiet quitting, or lying flat. In reality, what it is, it's a shift in what workers value. And this further gets exacerbated by the conversation as of late around productivity paranoia or productivity theater. The degree to which surveillance is taking place as we are now spending more and more time on these digital toolkits. Employee tracking tools have led to employees spending more time signaling where they are working at the expense of their actual work. Gartner predicts it's about 67 minutes of an employee's time. The real interesting question here, however, is trust. And so if you're going to be engaging in a dynamic around understanding how your employees are operating and what they're doing in terms of the time they're spending on these digital toolkits, you need to be in an environment where you've created and generated trust so your employees are willing to let you use that information to your advantage. We've long had the dynamics of surveillance capitalism. And though that may sound creepy to the older generations, to the younger generations, if you can use the data set to create a better experience for me as a customer, have at it. If you can use the data set to create a better experience for me as an employee, equally so. And so in that dimension of trust, we have this dynamic now about this conversation about the return to office. Well, in our Gen Z study, 70% of millennials and Gen Z, and in a similar study that we did around women at work with over 10,000 respondents, 65% of women all prefer a hybrid model. What they're looking for is flexibility, the ability to create a better work-life integration and a better work-life balance. And they're living in an environment where job postings have increased around remote work threefold since before the pandemic. And you would have expected that given the push for return to office, that we would have seen sort of a spike, if you will, in the September timeframe, post-Labor Day, around people being back in the office. And point in fact, Castle Systems has pointed out that in terms of the key carding into offices, it's only in the high 40s at that point. And now it seems to be leveling off at around 45%, which is a strong indication that though people are coming back to work, they're doing so in a hybrid way, working some days in the office, but many days at home, and trying to create that dynamic around flexibility that they so desire. And so the debate you should be having is not one of pushing your employees back to this office and eroding the trust that you need in order to successfully operate, but rather look at the work itself. Look at what works well in person and what works well remotely or individually. So those things that work well in person include idea generation or growth of professional networks or development of bridging and in-group connections. Those things that seem to work well remotely, actually idea prioritization, which is interesting when you compare it to idea generation. For generation, the body language actually helps in an environment to create and generate that popcorn of ideas. In prioritization, having everybody in the room subjects the room to the dynamics of groupthink. And so prioritizing virtually actually is a better mode for getting that done. You can see the other dimensions here around increased quiet time, better productivity, dedicated heads down work. And so it's a balance and a mix. And the dynamic then becomes, well, how do we sort for where do we work remotely? Where do we work when we're in a collaborative mode? What works well across the different ways that we're trying to engage our employees? You can see here a study from Bloomberg that shows how leaders are thinking about it in terms of, company-wide town halls, additional large group meetings, one-on-one meetings, board meetings. It's a function now of being much, much more deliberate in the design of what you want and using those different moments that matter to create the right work environment, one that serves what you're trying to achieve culturally, as well as helping the project teams develop and achieve the outcomes that you've set in front of them. So as we think about that myth and reality, what are the shifts to watch? Where are we really headed? And how do we manage these shifts as they unfold? So there are 5 shifts: from jobs to skills, from full-time employees to workforce ecosystems, from flexing work to flexing everything, from automation to augmentation, and from thinking about something greater than productivity. It's from productivity to our performance as humans. And what do we mean by these? So from jobs to skills, the dynamic is one that I already noted those organizations that are thinking about the skills that their employees have are able to tap into the greater, whole human that exists in their shop to direct those skills to different and critical needs that they may have. We found during the course of the pandemic that those organizations that only understood their workforce based on the bullets in their job description weren't really able to understand the skills that they needed and the skills that they had and how to direct those skills to the things that they now needed to go do. 77% of business and HR executives say that flexibly moving to skills is critical to navigating future disruptions. And we're finding that as organizations think about skills, it then enables them to think about, well, what's the job corridor between skills they have now and the skills they need, right? And it enables them to think about how do we source those skills differently from different talent pools. One study that we recently did around the green collar workforce, where we discovered that about 800 million jobs globally are going to be at risk due to the vulnerable sectors that these jobs are in, or the vulnerable regional locations that these jobs are in based on the climate change that's anticipated. We discovered that 80% of the skills we needed for this green future exist. So it's really a matter of closing a gap of 20% in the green job arena. And so that mentality is where it will head, where organizations will head more. What is the gap and how do I source the skills I need? From employees to ecosystems, we did a study with MIT recently around orchestrating workforce ecosystems. 93% of managers view some external workers as part of their organization's workforce, meaning the contingents, the vendors, the other partners, the part-time workers. It's not just the full-time folks that are critical to achieving a business outcome. It's a broader way of players, but few are actually thinking about this ecosystem in a way that helps you manage it better, in a way where you are intentionally orchestrating that ecosystem to meet your business objectives. Those organizations that are thinking about it intentionally are 8 times more likely to agree and that they're and to enable their managers to do what they need to do to hire in terms of the project skills they're looking for, and are 5 times more likely to sort of think about the work differently in order to enable members of the ecosystem to come to the table in a way. When you connect this with what's going on around jobs and skills, and you connect this with the dynamics of the labor shortage, which is essentially a skill shortage, ecosystems become a very interesting solution and to enable you to find that workforce that you need when you need them. It becomes even more interesting as we think about how to bring hybrid and remote work to life, because then those ecosystem players that you're talking about can show up the way I am right now as a tile on a Zoom screen. From flex work to flex everything. This goes back to the commentary earlier about what Gen Zs and millennials and women and others are looking for in terms of the kind of flexibility that they need in terms of their work, in terms of their work-life integration. Where it's emerging now is it's not just about how do I have the empowerment to flex when I'm working during the course of the day to integrate with my work life, but also how do I create the workforce experience where the workers are getting what they need from the workplace in a way that may be different than the one size fits all. We now have more and more data on the demographics of your organization, who's in it, what their needs are, and we're watching organizations use that information, much like they did to target solutions for their customers, to do so for their workers. So different packages and different benefits according to the worker life cycle, or different styles and toolkits for them to work on based on what they're trying to get done, or different levels of flexibility in terms of when they work in terms of the workday. And the AI toolkits that exist now can help this come to life, even in more traditional organizations where people are on a production line. It's the AI toolkits that are now able to work the Tetris game of who needs to be on the shift when to provide the flexibility that workers are looking for. From automation to augmentation. So this is interesting in that the dialogue around future of work was long one of the robot apocalypse. The robots are taking our jobs in a negative way. And then suddenly it started to shift with back to the issues around the labor dynamics and the skills shortage, whereas elevating humans to do what they're really good at and bringing technology to the table to do what it's really good at, unleashing the capacity of the humans in your workforce becomes critical to meeting what your business objectives are, becomes one of the solutions to sort of finding that untapped skill set that we talked about earlier. And so the issue becomes one of, can organizations actually enable a stronger degree of human and machine collaboration? And so we're seeing it not about automating the work, but actually augmenting the team, augmenting the human, enabling the human to do what a human does best much more readily. And you're hearing a lot about this even as of late with ChatGPT. These technologies are continuing to grow at an exponential pace. They've already begun to be part and parcel of how the work is done in the workplace, and they're only going to continue. So for organizations to tap into this, it requires being facile at how do we create the right dimensions around how humans collaborate with machines going forward. It will continue ongoing. And then finally, from productivity to human performance, what's interesting to us here is that the dialogue on well-being has become very front and center. We did a study of the C-suite in terms of what it's looking for around its well-being. Often you think about it in terms of just the core workforce. 89% of the C-suite and 75% of employees say that improving their well-being is a top priority for them this year. And yet you're living in a world where unfortunately, the digital and physical workplace isn't necessarily oriented to improving our well-being. In the digital workplace, it's a matter of, unfortunately, of us being the human middleware, toggling between the apps on the desktop. Gartner predicts that we waste about 32 days a year in terms of this kind of interaction on the digital workplace. And so how do we organize the digital and physical workplace in a way that helps humans perform at their best, where the well-being is of paramount, and the productivity that results is based on us working at our best as humans. And that's the direction that we're seeing this take going forward. So what do we do about it? Where does it leave us? Well, it fundamentally means that these shifts are creating an opportunity to reimagine work, workforce, and workplace. It means that we need to step back and look at the combination of how is work organized, what workforce is coming to the table, and what way to get that work done across a variety of different demographics, a variety of different talent pools, a variety of different worker types. And what is the workplace required to make that work happen best? What kind of physical and digital toolkits are required? How does that mix work? And how do we think about the work differently than how we have done so in the past? Recall that our current view of work was shaped through the industrial revolutions, from the production line to computerization, us in factory to moving in office. And those models are now being challenged because of the boundarylessness of ecosystems and us all being virtual, and the extent to which we don't need to be tied to a physical workplace any further. So how do we then reimagine, based on the work itself, how to bring all these things to the table? So that's critical. And in doing that, what we're really talking about is humanization. So elevating how we work as humans and humanizing work so that those things that humans do best and the way in which humans need to operate comes to the table first. So work-life integration and well-being, worker sentiment, intrinsic motivation around the different things that you value, the extent to which you're taking into account worker preferences, the night owls versus the morning people, and how to bring all of that together in a way that helps everyone perform in a way that is greater than how they were forced to in sort of that traditional 9-to-5 model. And so to bring all this to life, it means a different form of leadership. It means that leaders of tomorrow need to be those that are trust builders, those that are thinking about how do we engender the trust with our workforce so that we can take advantage of the different benefits that could happen, the opportunities from the data, and the strength of how workers who trust an organization and trust their leadership will do more intrinsically to achieve better outcomes. Purpose creators, those that are thinking about how do I think about not just the extent to which a project team and a member of the workforce is comfortable in the office, but actually understands their contribution and understands how that contribution serves a greater purpose, one that they value. ecosystem orchestrators, those that are thinking about where do I find the talent pools and how do I find these pools within various vendors and how do I bring all of this together in a way that enables project teams to tap into those skills when they need them as we're developing and delivering different outcomes for our customers and our workforce. Connection facilitators, those that are thinking about the different deliberate moments where connection is created and how do we do that in a way that is supportive of the future that we want. And then finally, work-life advocates. And by here, it's not just you're supportive of work-life integration, but you're actually a role model too. The C-suite matters in terms of their work and their well-being and need to be an example of that level of authenticity. I'm taking time, I'm spending time on my well-being in important ways, and I advocate that you all do as well. And so with that, there's a really promising future in front of us. Let's get to work.
And now, please welcome Dennis O'Keefe.